To really wrap our heads around the roots of American isolationism in this explainer, we actually need to start, well, not in America. We have to look deep into the horrific meat grinder of World War I Europe, because to truly grasp why the United States tried so hard to just wall itself off from the globe, we first have to understand the sheer trauma that triggered it. So, let's dive right into the rise, the peak, and the ultimate, inevitable collapse of American isolationism.
Take a look at the heavily fortified sector around Verdun in 1916. This historic French city was ringed by ancient fortresses along the Meuse River. Now, the German chief of general staff at the time, Erich von Falkenhayn, he knew a swift, clean breakthrough on the Western Front was basically impossible. So he designed a battle aimed entirely at racking up casualties. He engineered this brutal war of attrition, intended quite literally to bleed France white, knowing full well the French army would defend that historically significant city to the absolute last man.
And the result of that trap? It was a level of destruction that completely shocked the world. We're talking over 700,000 casualties in just 302 days, split almost right down the middle between French and German troops. The landscape was so utterly devastated by roughly 40 million artillery shells that it permanently altered the earth itself. In fact, thousands of acres around Verdun are still designated as a forbidden zone rouge, a red zone, where human settlement and farming are strictly prohibited even today because of all the unexploded ordnance and toxic residue. They literally had to erase 9 entire French villages from the map.
So, you might be wondering, why did America turn its back on the world? Well, when you see that kind of sheer, industrial-scale slaughter happening across the ocean, it changes you. A deeply traumatized American public, absolutely desperate to avoid sending their own youth into a European meat grinder, rallied behind a powerful strategy: isolationism. Once the Great War ended, the #1 goal for millions of Americans was just making sure they never got pulled into another Verdun.
Now, it's really important to get this definition right, because isolationism isn't just sticking your head in the sand and pretending the rest of the world doesn't exist. It's actually a very specific defensive and domestic posture. It's a national strategy where a country actively avoids foreign entanglements, dodges permanent military alliances, and steers entirely clear of overseas conflicts. And all of that is done so the government can focus its priorities entirely inward on domestic development.
You can really think of it as having 4 main pillars. First up is non-interventionism, just a strict, flat-out refusal to intervene in the wars or domestic politics of other nations. Second is an anti-alliance stance. That means no binding mutual defense treaties, so your military can't be forced into action just because an ally gets attacked. Third, you've got protectionism, throwing up high tariffs and trade barriers to shield your own domestic industries. And fourth, strict neutrality and unilateralism, basically preserving complete freedom of action by refusing to join supranational bodies. These 4 pillars really form the bedrock of America's approach to the globe.
Section 1. The Founding Precedent, Establishing the Geographic Moat, 1796 to 1823. To really see how deeply rooted these pillars are, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Isolationism wasn't just some knee-jerk reaction to World War I, it was actually the original playbook. Right back in his 1796 farewell address, George Washington explicitly warned the young republic against forming permanent alliances with European powers. His argument was that North America's geographic separation, basically using the entire Atlantic Ocean as a giant moat, allowed it to safely stay neutral. Fast forward a bit to 1823, and the Monroe Doctrine formalizes this into a 2-hemisphere policy. Europe stays out of the Western Hemisphere, and the U.S. promises to stay out of European wars. For a long time, the ocean was America's greatest defense system.
Section 2. The Interwar Peak. America First, 1919 to 1939.
So the profound trauma of World War I totally supercharged those founding ideas into this massive interwar isolationist movement. The fresh memory of the trenches made that geographic moat seem more vital than ever before. There was just this immense populist energy, perfectly captured by the political cartoons of the era, pushing to restrict immigration and essentially pull up the American drawbridge. The idea was to carefully filter out foreign influence to protect internal stability. The public appetite for foreign engagement, it was just completely dead.
And this wasn't just talk. That populist drive quickly became binding law. Despite President Woodrow Wilson practically begging them, the U.S. Senate firmly rejected joining the League of Nations in 1919. They were terrified that membership would automatically force Americans into foreign wars without Congress having a say. Then, right in the middle of the Great Depression, Congress doubles down. They passed strict neutrality acts between 1935 and 1937 that flat-out banned arms sales and loans to any nations at war. And as World War II started looming on the horizon, the America First Committee mobilized, exploding to over 800,000 members. Their one goal? Keep America out of another European bloodbath.
Section 3. The Death of Classic Isolationism. The Moat is Breached, 1941.
Because here's the thing about moats. No matter how wide or deep they are, external reality eventually catches up. And we see that sudden, permanent collapse of the isolationist dream hit on December 7, 1941. The devastating Imperial Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor proved in an instant that in the modern era of aviation and global navies, oceans just couldn't provide absolute defense anymore. That two-hemisphere policy, which relied entirely on geographic distance, basically evaporated in a single morning. The moat had been fundamentally breached. The before and after here is just wild. Before 1941, you had America relying on strict neutrality, high tariffs, and a flat-out refusal to build foreign alliances. But after 1945, the whole strategy flips on its head. Recognizing that isolationism had completely failed to prevent World War II, America pivoted to actively building the post-war liberal international order. They established NATO for collective defense, they drove the creation of the United Nations, they built the Bretton Woods monetary system, and they maintained a massive global military presence to contain Soviet expansion. Those four pillars of isolationism were completely replaced by global interventionism.
But actually, and this is a really fascinating historical pattern, this isn't just an American story. Look at Tokugawa Japan. They maintained closed borders for over 200 years to keep out foreign influence, right? But that collapsed the second Commodore Perry's modern warships steamed in back in 1853. Or Ming and Qing China, who enacted these strict maritime bans for internal stability, only for the First Opium War to violently force open their ports in 1839. And then, of course, the interwar U.S., whose legislative walls fell to Pearl Harbor in 1941. The common denominator here? Deeply entrenched isolationism almost always collapses when a sudden external, technological, or military trigger forcefully breaches those borders.
So, why does all this history matter to us today? Well, while isolationism sounds incredibly appealing during periods of economic hardship or deep war fatigue, completely retreating from the world stage creates a massive, dangerous power vacuum. History consistently shows us that when a major power steps back, it inevitably fuels regional instability. And eventually, that instability spirals outward, breeding the exact global conflicts that the isolationist nation was desperately trying to avoid in the first place.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. As modern technology, global trade, and digital networks shrink our world further and further every single day, is isolationism even a viable strategy anymore? Or is building a wall around your nation just a temporary, fragile illusion of safety? Keep that question in mind the next time you hear calls to pull up the drawbridge.